Tell me if this sounds familiar. You meet someone, and something in you lights up. Not the casual, surface-level attraction that fades after a few dates. Something deeper. Something that feels like recognition. Like you've been waiting for this person without knowing you were waiting. Like the ache you've been carrying finally found a shape it fits into. And so you do what you've always done. You open. Completely. Without strategy, without caution, without the self-protective instincts that most people bring to the beginning of something new. You give them your attention, your energy, your time, your emotional bandwidth. You learn their rhythms. You memorize their moods. You start adjusting yourself, slightly, imperceptibly, to fit their edges. Not because they asked you to, because it feels natural. Because for you, love has always meant becoming whatever the other person needs. And for a while, it works. It works beautifully. They've never felt so seen. Nobody has ever listened to them the way you listen. Nobody has ever anticipated their needs before they spoke them. You become indispensable, essential, vital. But somewhere, and you can never pinpoint exactly when, a trade happens. You become so attuned to them that you lose the frequency of yourself. Their favorite restaurant becomes your favorite restaurant. Their problems become your midnight emergency. Their mood determines whether you have a good day or a terrible one. And one morning you wake up, maybe months in, maybe years, and you catch yourself in the mirror, and for a split second, you don't recognize the person staring back. Not physically, psychically. You've been so absorbed in someone else's life that you forgot to live your own. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But for empaths, that transformation is never equal. One person expands, the other evaporates, and the one who evaporates almost always calls it love. This is about that, about the disappearing, about why you do it, about what it costs you, and about whether it's possible to love someone without losing the only person you can't afford to lose: yourself. Let's trace this from the beginning. Here's a question that might sting. Did you fall in love with them, or did you fall in love with being needed by them? Sit with that. Don't rush past it, because there's a version of love that empaths specialize in, one that looks romantic from the outside but runs on something much older than romance. It runs on a childhood equation, an equation that goes something like, if I can figure out what you need and give it to you before you even ask, you won't leave. That's not love. That's a survival strategy wearing love's clothes. And it probably started before you ever had your first relationship. It started in whatever house you grew up in, with whatever family handed you the template for what connection looks like. Maybe love in your family was conditional. Not in the obvious, dramatic way. Not, I'll love you if you get straight A's. More subtle. Love was available when you were easy, when you didn't make a mess, when you read the room and adjusted accordingly, when you took care of other people's emotional states so that the household ran smoothly. And you were good at it, terrifyingly good. You could sense a fight brewing between your parents before anyone raised their voice. You knew which sibling needed space and which one needed attention. You became the emotional thermostat of the house, the person everyone unconsciously relied on to regulate the temperature. And nobody thanked you for it. Not because they were ungrateful, but because they didn't even know it was happening. Your function was invisible, essential and invisible. So you took that template, that deep wiring that says love equals anticipation, love equals erasure of your own needs, love equals making yourself useful, and you carried it into every relationship you've ever had. The first time someone chose you, it confirmed everything. See? This works. Being needed works. Disappearing into their world keeps them close. And every time it ended, every time they left anyway, or grew distant, or took you for granted, it didn't challenge the equation. It just made you try harder next time. Give more, open wider, disappear faster. Jung described this pattern through what he called the anima and animus, the internal image of the opposite energy that we project onto our partners. For the empath, this projection is not just psychological, it's total. You don't project an image onto the person you love. You project an entire identity. Their needs become your compass. Their moods become your weather. Their validation becomes the only evidence that you exist. And that's the part that makes it dangerous. Not the love itself. Love is never the danger. The danger is that for the empath, love becomes the only context in which they feel real. Outside of a relationship, you feel unmoored, not just lonely, uncertain, like your edges blur when there's nobody nearby to define them against. You don't know what you want for dinner because for the last 3 years you've been eating what they wanted. You don't know what music you actually like because your playlists are curated around their taste. You open your closet and realize half your wardrobe was chosen to match an aesthetic that isn't yours. That's not codependency in the clinical sense. Codependency has become a catch-all word that's lost its specificity. What this is, what Jung would have recognized, is a failure of individuation. The process of becoming yourself was interrupted by the overwhelming gravitational pull of someone else's emotional field. And for the empath, whose perceptual system is already oriented outward, that pull is almost impossible to resist. You didn't choose to lose yourself. You were doing the only thing your wiring taught you was love. But it wasn't love. It was audition. And the part you were performing was the person who deserves to be kept. Every empath in love operates under an unspoken agreement. Nobody writes it down. Nobody negotiates the terms. But it's there, running in the background of every interaction, every sacrifice, every 2 a.m. conversation where you put their crisis ahead of your sleep. The contract goes like this: I will give you everything. I will anticipate your needs. I will absorb your darkness. I will translate your chaos into something manageable. I will be your soft place, your mirror, your emotional first responder. And in exchange, you will never leave. That's it. That's the whole deal. And the tragic part is that the other person never signed it. They don't know it exists. They think you're just incredibly generous, incredibly loving, incredibly low maintenance. They think this is just who you are, someone who gives without asking, who bends without breaking, who shows up without being called. They don't realize that every act of generosity is a deposit, that you're keeping a ledger they can't see, that somewhere inside you, there's a running count of everything you've sacrificed. And someday, when you've given enough, when you've proved enough, it'll be your turn. They'll finally see you. They'll finally reciprocate. They'll finally love you the way you've been loving them. Except they won't. Not because they're cruel, because the system was rigged from the start. Here's what actually happens. You give and give. They receive and receive. And because you never named the contract, they have no idea that a debt is accumulating. From their perspective, you're happy. You're the one who always says, it's fine. You're the one who never complains, never asks, never makes it about you. So they keep receiving. Not greedily, naturally. The way anyone would if someone kept handing them things without ever mentioning a price. And then one day the ledger fills up. The column of what you've given versus what you've received becomes so imbalanced that the resentment you didn't even know you were building finally surfaces. Maybe it comes as a fight over nothing, an explosion about dishes or forgotten plans that's really about years of emotional imbalance. Maybe it comes as withdrawal, that slow fade where you stop initiating, stop responding, stop caring, and you can't explain why. Or maybe, and this is the one that hurts the most, it comes as grief. Grief for a relationship that never actually existed the way you thought it did. Because the relationship you were in and the relationship you were building in your head were two entirely different things. In yours, there was an implicit promise of return. In theirs, there was just someone who loved very hard and never seemed to need anything back. Jung wrote about projection with devastating clarity. He said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the inverse is also true and more painful. Everything that we pour into others reveals what we refuse to give ourselves." And for the empath in love, what you refuse to give yourself is permission to be the one who receives. Not to be needed, to be wanted. Not to be the person someone depends on, the person someone chooses. Not out of need, but out of genuine, uncontracted desire. Think about your current relationship, or your last one. When was the last time your partner said, unprompted, "What do you need right now?" Not in response to a crisis you were having, not because you finally broke down after months of silent accumulation, but just because. Because they noticed you. because they saw past the performance of fine and into the reality of depleted. If you can't remember, that tells you something about the dynamic. Not necessarily about the person, about the role you cast yourself in and the invitation you never extended. You trained them to take, not maliciously, through consistency, through relentless, unasked-for generosity that left no room for reciprocity. You filled every gap before they could, and then you wondered why they stopped reaching. The invisible contract isn't betrayed by the other person. It's betrayed by its own design. It was never meant to work. It was meant to delay the moment you'd have to sit alone with the most frightening question an empath can face. What if I'm enough without the giving? There's a specific kind of emptiness that comes after an empath finally stops performing, not after a breakup, though it can coincide with one. It can happen inside a relationship, inside a marriage, inside a friendship that's lasted decades. It happens the first time you pause, the first time you pull back, even slightly, from the relentless cycle of giving, and you wait. You wait to see what fills the space, and nothing does. The silence that comes back isn't peaceful. It's hollow, like standing in a house after the furniture's been moved out and hearing your own footsteps echo off walls you forgot were bare. You realize that under all the caretaking, all the emotional labor, all the midnight texts and morning check-ins and "how are you feeling?" conversations that were always about them, under all of it, there's this vast, empty space where you were supposed to be. Not supposed to be in theory, supposed to be in practice. You were supposed to be developing interests, opinions, desires, a sense of self that didn't depend on someone else's proximity to exist. But you didn't. Because every unit of energy that should have gone towards self-construction went toward other construction instead. And now you're standing in the wreckage of your own absence, and it's terrifying. This is where a lot of empaths break. Not from the pain of a relationship ending, but from the discovery that without the relationship, without the role, without the function, without someone to pour into, they don't know who they are. Not in an abstract philosophical sense, in a material, daily, practical sense. What do I eat? What do I watch? What do I do on a Saturday morning when nobody needs me? Those questions sound trivial. They're not. They're existential. Because every answer you've been giving for years was borrowed from somebody else's life. And now that the borrowing has stopped, or been paused, even temporarily, you're left holding nothing that's verifiably yours. Jung called this the loss of soul, not in a mystical sense, in a psychological one. He described it as a state in which the vital center of the personality has been transferred to an external object, a person, a role, a relationship. And when that object is removed or disrupted, the individual experiences a psychic collapse. Not because they're weak, because they built their entire psychological infrastructure around something outside themselves, and the foundation was never meant to hold that weight. You've felt this. Maybe you're feeling it right now. That strange, nameless sadness that doesn't attach to any specific loss but permeates everything. The feeling that you're going through the motions, working, cooking, answering emails, smiling at appropriate intervals, but there's nobody home. Like the part of you that used to animate your life packed up and left, and what remains is a perfectly functional shell running on autopilot. And here's what nobody warns you about. This phase can last a long time, weeks, months, sometimes years. Because rebuilding a self isn't like rebuilding a house. There aren't blueprints. There's no before photo to reference. The self you're trying to find isn't the one that existed before the relationship. That self was already compromised, already wired for dissolution. The self you're looking for has to be built from scratch, from the ground, from the first honest answer to the question, what do I actually want? Not what will make them happy, not what will prevent conflict, not what will ensure that someone stays. What you want, period, full stop, without reference to another human being. And the first time you ask that question honestly, not as a self-help exercise, not as a therapy prompt, but as a real, bewildered cry from the center of yourself, you might find that you genuinely don't know the answer. And the not knowing isn't failure, it's the beginning. It's the first time in maybe your whole life that you're standing in your own shoes without already walking towards someone else. That hollowness is not the end, it's the clearing. the space that had to empty before anything real could grow in it. But God, does it hurt while it's happening? And what makes it harder is that the people around you, friends, family, even therapists sometimes, don't understand why you're struggling. From the outside, nothing catastrophic happened. You didn't get fired, nobody died. Maybe you didn't even go through a breakup. Maybe you just woke up one day inside a perfectly intact relationship and realized you had no idea who you were anymore. And that kind of crisis doesn't generate sympathy, it generates confusion. But you seem fine. But they're a good person. But you have everything. Right, you have everything except yourself. And the loneliest feeling in the world isn't being alone, it's being surrounded by people who think they know you, and realizing that the person they know is a character you created. A role you've been playing so long the audience thinks it's a documentary, including you. That realization is the bottom, and paradoxically, it's also the ground floor. Because you can't rebuild on a foundation you can't see. And this painful, disorienting, identity-stripping moment is the first time you've been able to see the foundation clearly. It's bare, it's cracked, and it's yours. Now the actual building can begin. Rebuilding doesn't start with a breakthrough, it starts with something embarrassingly small. You're in a grocery store, you're standing in the cereal aisle, and for the first time in, you can't remember how long, you're picking based on what you actually want to eat. Not what's healthiest, not what your partner preferred, not what takes the least time to prepare because you're always running late meeting someone else's needs. Just, what do you feel like? It takes you an unreasonable amount of time. You stand there for 5 minutes looking at boxes, and something cracks open. Not dramatically, quietly. A recognition that the simple act of choosing for yourself, with no audience, no judgment, no performance, is so unfamiliar that it makes your eyes sting. That's where it starts, in the cereal aisle. In the moments so ordinary they don't seem worth mentioning. It continues in other places. You drive somewhere without telling anyone where you're going. You watch a movie you've been curious about but never watched because it wasn't their thing. You sit in a coffee shop alone on a Saturday and realize, maybe for the first time, that alone doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like oxygen. These moments aren't healing in the Instagram sense. No one's going to turn them into an aesthetic post. They're awkward and uncomfortable and slightly disorienting, like learning to use a limb that's been in a cast for years. You're clumsy with yourself. You second-guess every choice. You keep reaching for the old pattern. What would they want? And having to catch yourself mid-reach and redirect. But something shifts, slowly, almost imperceptibly. You start to notice what you like, not what you should like, what you genuinely enjoy. The texture of your own preferences starts to emerge, faint at first, like a watermark on paper held up to light. You like mornings better than evenings. You like walking without a destination. You like silence, real silence, not the kind that means someone's upset. You like spicy food more than you realized because you'd been ordering mild for years to match someone else's palate. These discoveries feel absurdly small and cosmically large at the same time. Because each one is a piece of evidence that you exist, independent of function, independent of someone else's approval, just you, choosing, for the first time and maybe ever. Jung described individuation as the process by which a person becomes their own self, whole, indivisible, and distinct from other people. Not separate, distinct. There's a difference. Separate means isolated, distinct means defined. An empath who has individuated doesn't stop feeling others. They stop disappearing into them. They can sit next to someone they love and remain themselves. They can hold someone's pain without wearing it. They can give without subtracting from their own existence. That's the goal. Not detachment, not walls, not the cold, clinical boundaries that social media prescribes like a one-size-fits-all antidote to everything. The goal is a love that includes you, that has room for both people, that doesn't require you to shrink in order for the other person to feel big. And here's what nobody tells you about this phase, the phase of return, of coming back to yourself. It changes the quality of your love, not the quantity. You don't love less, you love differently, more clearly, more honestly, more sustainably. You stop confusing merging with intimacy. You stop confusing sacrifice with devotion. You stop confusing the erasure of self with the proof of love. Because here's the truth that took me years to understand, and might take you years too. The most loving thing you can do for another person is remain yourself while you're with them. Not a version of yourself designed for their comfort, not a mirror reflecting their needs back at them. You, with your preferences and your moods and your weird taste in music, and the specific way you take your coffee and the opinions you used to hide because they didn't match. That's what real intimacy looks like. Not two people merging into one, two distinct people choosing each other over and over while remaining fully themselves. Jung was unequivocal about this. He wrote that, "The greatest thing a human being can do is to live in such a way that their existence becomes a living question." Not an answer to someone else's question, not a solution to someone else's problem, a question. An open, evolving, unresolved expression of who you are and who you're becoming. The empath who comes back to themselves doesn't stop loving hard. That capacity doesn't diminish. What changes is the direction. The love that used to flow entirely outward, emptying you, depleting you, erasing you, starts to include an inward current, a loop that feeds back to the source. Not selfish, sustainable. And the relationships that survive that shift, the ones that can hold two whole people instead of one person and a mirror, those are the ones worth keeping. I need to say something to you directly, not to the audience, to you. The one who's been listening to this with something heavy sitting in their chest. You're still in there. I know it doesn't feel like it. I know there are days when you look around your life and wonder where you went. When you trace the outline of your relationships and realize your shape is missing, that the space you occupied was always carved to fit someone else. I know that's disorienting. I know it makes you question whether there was ever a you to begin with, or if you've always been this, a mirror, a vessel, a container for other people's emotions. But you're wrong about that. There is a you. There always was. It's the kid who liked a specific song before anyone told them what was cool. The teenager who had a thought, a real, unfiltered thought, about the world that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. The person who, in rare, unguarded moments, felt a flash of wanting something for no reason other than the wanting itself, before the programming kicked in and redirected that want towards service. That person didn't die, they just went underground. The way Jung described it, buried beneath layers of persona, of adaptation, of the 1,000 tiny agreements you made with the world to trade yourself for belonging. And the work now, the real work, not the performative self-care, not the journal prompts, not the bubble baths that Instagram calls healing. The real work is excavation. Going down into the places you've been avoiding. Picking up the pieces of yourself that you left behind in other people's houses, in other people's needs, in other people's version of who you should be. It's slow. It's unglamorous. Some days it feels like nothing is happening. Some days it feels like everything is breaking. But what's actually happening, underneath the noise, underneath the grief, underneath the disorienting unfamiliarity of your own company, is something Jung considered the single most important task of a human life. You're becoming real. Not perfect, not healed, not some polished final version of yourself that never struggles. Real. Which means inconsistent and contradictory, and still figuring it out, and occasionally wanting to disappear into someone again because the old pattern is so much easier than the new one. Real means messy, and real is enough. You loved hard. You loved at a cost that most people couldn't even comprehend. And now you're learning something that nobody ever taught you, that the same depth of feeling you poured into everyone else was always meant to include you. Not after everyone else is taken care of, not when you've earned it, not when the other person finally reciprocates. Now, as you are. Before you've fixed anything, before you've proven anything, you are the love you keep giving away. If something here reached you, if you felt it land in that aching, unnamed place, don't rush past it. Stay here for a second. Let it settle. This channel is where I go into the things most people don't talk about. The real stuff. The underneath stuff. I'm here every week. Come back when you need to.